Welcome to MumAbroad's YouTube channel. I'm joined today by Lyra Turnbull. Originally from the UK, Lyra's family heritage is incredibly varied, with a mix of Scottish, Welsh, English, French, Austrian, Polish, Czech, and German nationalities. After having worked in investment banking and advertising in London, her life in Germany began as an isolated stay-at-home mum of 3 young children. When her marriage broke down and divorce followed, Lyra decided to stay and build a new life there. She retrained as a certified coach, has a master's in communication and organizational psychology, and is a licensed counselor and therapist. Hi, Lyra.
Hey, Jane. Thanks for the invitation. It's great to be here today.
How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Yourself?
Good, fine, thank you.
Great.
Lyra, you retrained as a coach and counsellor as a direct result of your own experiences. What was it that drew you to coaching in the first place?
That's a good question. I think what it was, it's a challenge for us living in foreign countries as parents. At the best of times, even when things are going great, it can be a challenge. And when things go wrong, and you mentioned, my personal situation at the time, then the sense of isolation is considerable, and not all countries make it easy for women or mothers to work. And so at the time I was really, really stuck, and I was really just looking for, okay, what can I do as my first step? It was at the beginning of the stage where you could start doing stuff online, at least partly. And so I thought, okay, well, this is a thing I can do. My German is not brilliant yet. Access to German universities was difficult. And so this gave me an opportunity to just begin. And what I liked about it was the idea that, okay, coaching gives you a chance to reassess your life and what it is you want to do, and look at, okay, what resources do I have, and how can I get out of this situation into a better situation, and so that was what drew me to it originally. And the flexibility that we now take for granted, but back then wasn't really so much the case.
Lyra, you experienced yourself being an expat, having young children and not having your extended family close by. What would you say are the biggest challenges in that situation for parents?
Yeah, that was a really challenging time. And when I speak to other expats here and elsewhere, of course, that we have, I think, a common thread that goes through that is a mixture of, what do I do if things go wrong? Have I got a backup team, a support team? Am I embedded in my local community or not? And that, of course, requires effort. You have to pay in order to be part of that, in a nice sense. I mean, I don't think of that in a mercenary way. It's an emotional thing about committing to being with that local group. And for me, that was very important. It helped in a lot of occasions. I think the other challenges are the fact that family is distant, and if anything happens to them, we've seen that in this past year, that the sense of helplessness is a little bit more prevalent, because you can't just pop over and have a cup of tea and say, are you all right? Is there anything I can do for you? And Skype is brilliant, and telephones are wonderful, but still there's a sense of disconnect at the same time that you can actually see people. So that's been a bit of a challenge as well, I think, for many, many people. And then, of course, the idea about what's right and what's wrong. I speak with clients sometimes about the question, okay, in Germany, they do things like this. Well, that's really weird. And we have a whole different way of doing things back home. And this question of, okay, what is right? And my child is growing up here, so I'm exposing them to this new set of rules. And, okay, which set of rules is now right? And so finding good orientation there. And I mean, I don't know about you, but your experiences, but in the best of marriages, I think it's fair to say that there are disagreements about what's right or wrong, and what the rules are going to be. And when you kind of put on top of that the local community, maybe friends, peer group and stuff like that, that can become also very challenging. So you have to have or develop a strong sense of flexibility and also an awareness of who you are at the same time. And not that these two things kind of cancel each other out, not at all. But I think those are requirements that help make living as an expat parent much easier.
Can you give some practical advice for families to make the most of the first few months when they're relocating to a new country? If they want to make that transition as smooth as possible, what would you say to them?
Yeah, that's a really important question, I think, because a lot of the time we think about preparing the packing of the house and making sure the school places are all organized, and is the nice new apartment, has it got good curtains or whatever. And all of these things, of course, contribute to us feeling happy and settled in our new environment, or even excited and how is this adventure going to be. But I think sometimes we neglect the leaving part, the saying goodbye, the tying up of loose ends, the being grateful for what we had in this place that we are now leaving. And getting closure for that, for ourselves as individuals, as for ourselves as couples, and also for our children, because sometimes they are yanked out of the school year. They lose their peer group, which for teenagers is particularly sensitive time. So to make sure that we facilitate in as much as we can a good goodbye, with a lot of preparation for what's coming as well, with generating enough optimism and perspective for ourselves and for our young people to actually look forward to this new chapter. I think that's really important, to get that balance and to not just be hurtling towards the next new thing, but honoring the achievements of the past and the good things that you have experienced. And also the grieving. This disenfranchised grief is an interesting term that I think a lot of people aren't so aware of. But the idea that you're only allowed to be sad about very specific things, and that other stuff is somehow doesn't count. And I think we do that at our peril, particularly with teenagers.
Yeah, I agree with everything you've said. And I would also put in there a point about the family that we leave behind, that it really helps if they are on the same wavelength as us.
Yeah.
I think particularly when you have children, because if you have grandparents or aunts and uncles or cousins who are terribly sad that you're leaving and keep telling you, I think that can weigh heavy on the family members who are leaving, and particularly on children. So I think that's something to be aware of as well.
I agree absolutely, because it's a question of family loyalties, isn't it? Is it right for me to be going? Maybe you're going to a better place, and then it's like, well, I feel guilty because I'm leaving them behind, or I'm going to a worse place, and the people who are there feel, oh, how sorry, and you feel like, okay, should I be feeling worried and traumatized about this? Or so I agree with you that the system in which we're embedded, the family, our closer friends, schools, and so on, it's helpful if everybody's really aware of the comments that they make and what they're trying to achieve by making them.
How would you describe your approach to counselling and coaching, Lyra?
Well, that's a good question. I get asked quite a lot, because I think it's very relevant to the people I work with. Although sometimes it's quite surprising. A lot of people are not aware of all the different possibilities and the different ways of working. So to make it, to boil it down, if you like, into a nutshell, is that I have a multidisciplinary approach. I use a lot of different methods depending on what's called for, because no individual is a carbon copy of anyone else, and so every situation we're in is different. The people we have around us, the resources we have, the life experience we bring to the situation, they're all different. So it means having a if you like, a toolbox of different possibilities, and being able to pull out of each of those things that could be useful. Having said that, though, I would say I do tend to lean more towards a systemic approach, because this idea that we've often had in positive psychology, for example, in the last, since the 80s, early 90s, that if you think positively enough, everything will be fine. That's okay at a very close level, close to home. But we're embedded in things that are much greater than us. We've seen this through COVID, and you can't just rose-tinted glasses through the whole thing and think, okay, well, it's going to be fine. Of course, there's an element of positive thinking about it, but also being realistic and attributing setbacks not just to ourselves, but also to the system in which we're in and the resources we have or maybe don't have, so that we don't overtax ourselves and end up feeling terrible because we've somehow failed something that it wasn't possible to succeed at anyway.
Lyra, you work in Schmitten face-to-face and also Frankfurt when COVID allows, and you also offer your therapy online. How have you found the transition to working more in a virtual space? And are there issues that are off topic due to the restrictions of online therapy?
working online means that there's a difference in the atmosphere and the environment we're able to establish or to build in the relationship between counselor and client, or therapist and patient. Because when someone comes to the practice, we have an environment which is my environment, so I can control it. I can make sure that it's a safe space for my clients to be in, and I can make sure that I can monitor how they're doing. Whereas if I speak to a client and they're, I don't know, in their office, which I've found this has been the case, or if they're at home and the children are in the next room crying, or if they actually have a difficult home situation and maybe their partner is in the background, all of these things mean that I can't control that environment to the extent that they feel safe and can really actually come to that quiet centering space where they can actually do the work that we need to do in order for them to, get the results that they're hoping for. So that's been a challenge sometimes. I even have had situations where, unfortunately, clients have even had bosses, pinging them on another screen saying, I need to speak to you. And they're like, yeah, well, I'm in a meeting at the moment. And this kind of thing, because some people's workload has been just exploded so much that, that's the only way that they've been able to fit it in. So that's sometimes a little bit of a challenge. Another point is that I would say for counselling, there is definitely nothing that's out of bounds. So we can talk about anything. But when it comes to more deeper psychotherapy work, there are limits to what you can achieve at a distance, because sometimes it involves not just talking to each other and looking at a camera, but perhaps also some form of contact, or maybe a client is deeply upset and needs comforting, or at least to have the feeling that they're safe. And I can't give that to them from the other end of the fiber optic cable. So I think there it's a question of being aware, assessing the situation at the beginning of the time where we work together, and say, okay, what is possible today? What's the environment like? Who's around you? Who's not around you? How do you feel? How long do we have? Are there any interruptions likely? And then based on that, saying, okay, what could be a good way going forward? So that's a big difference. And I would say it's improved accessibility. It means that I can work with people in different countries, in different cities, which is wonderful for everyone, because it just means people get help faster. I would say then one of the advantages of being out here in Schmitten is that I live right next to the forest, and the practice is right next to the forest. So that means that people who are maybe in the city and come out here, we can go on walking sessions as well. So we can walk and talk, if you like. And that's really good, because there have been lots of scientific studies, particularly during this last 18 months, showing that forest bathing, as they call it, or being in contact with nature is really an important part of the healing process, and also rebalances. It's like recalibrating and becoming part of the real world again. So I think that is a great advantage. And people have been much more open and willing to do that, possibly because they've got more flexible working arrangements with their employers. Sometimes just because they simply realize, I have to get out of the town, I have to get out of my apartment, my home, and be in contact with nature again. And so I would say that is a huge advantage that we've experienced in the last year.
Yeah, I think our environment is incredibly important, isn't it? And as you were saying that, I was just thinking that my girlfriends are very important to me, and I love spending time with them. And often we'll go out and have a glass of wine together, or we'll have a meal together, and it's good fun and it's enjoyable, and it's good for the soul to have that interaction with people. But what's more therapeutic is when I go with my friends and we walk along the beach, or we walk up in the hills close to where we live, and talk at the same time. It really does feel like it's almost been a therapy session. You really feel like you benefit from that, and that's got to be because of the location, not just the conversation.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. We have a small river, a stream nearby. We have a couple of, what do you call it? You say bio farmers, or ecologically friendly farming farmers here, where they have the lambs gambling around. We have llamas nearby and all sorts of things like that. You see the deer here regularly when you're in the forest. So these are experiences that they touch us all deeply, and they make us aware of the fact that, like, there is more to life, the universe, and our existence than just, ticking the boxes on our things I've achieved today kind of thing, and what did I buy. And I think what you mentioned about being with girlfriends as well, and they're here not to put a specific gender twist on the whole thing, of course. But I think being with friends generally is something that we underestimate at our peril. You know, there's a lot of focus in our world, in our society, on who is your partner, who do you live with? If you're single, why aren't you looking for someone, and so on and so forth. And I think we can offer each other an awful lot more on so many other levels as friends, and these relationships are extremely important, particularly in an expat environment where so many things shift. So being a good friend is not just something that is good for the other person, but it's also great for us, I think, as well.
Lyra, just on a slightly lighter note to finish, your family background is a real mix of nationalities. You've lived in many different countries and you speak several languages. When people ask you where you're from, what do you say?
Yeah, that's one that sometimes stumps me. I think it depends a lot on why I think people are asking, you know, because sometimes we ask that question because we want to connect to others. Sometimes that question is misunderstood as in a kind of, do you really belong here? But sometimes there's a genuine idea of wanting to other people and to distance you and show you you're not part of a group. So I think it depends greatly on the circumstances. I would say I'm a European. I think that's definitely kind of my core identity, if you like, because there's just so much that plays into that. It's a challenge sometimes with children. I think expats with mixed culture kids, or so this third culture kids phenomena, if you like, that's hard for them, because sometimes when they were growing up, they're like, okay, mommy, what am I? And that's a hard thing to answer. But because well, actually, I think that the easiest thing, or the best thing to do there, is to say you don't have to be one thing. You are you. And that means lots of different things in different situations. And to be accepting of that, and to be respectful, and as far as it's possible for us to accept other people's ways of doing things and positions and ideas about the world, and to always actively seek dialogue, in a hope to kind of find some middle ground where it's at least possible to meet in the middle and let the other person just do their thing. So yeah, because even within my family, there are things that come together where both of these parts just say, that doesn't work. And then you're left with that internal dilemma, which is so familiar to us all. It's like, so what do I do now?
I think we look for people who are similar to us. And I think so sometimes that we kind of put ourselves in a bit of a box. We look for somebody that speaks the same language as us or comes from the same place as us. But equally, I think living abroad, I also feel that I'm drawn to people who have had similar experiences to me. It's not just about the background and where they come from. It's about the experience that they've had in their life.
I would agree with you that as a form of communication, I would say it's kind of, it doesn't matter about the language, it doesn't matter about social status or education or any of those things so much. Of course, they play in, but it's not the main driving factor. It's a question. It's a question of heart. You know, my soul understands your soul. My heart understands your heart. We have been through similar experiences. It's a shortcut, if you like, to cut through all of the other stuff that we have to protect ourselves going through the world. And we recognize that in each other. We can see that in the other person often, and that helps us to make or establish a contact at a deeper level more quickly, perhaps. And I think that's one of the great advantages of the international community that we have, is that we're there for each other, that we're able to be there for each other, because we do share so many experiences that people who remain in the local community, maybe where we originally came from, if you really have that simple background of that's where I grew up and now I left at 30, 40, whatever, that they don't have that experience, and so they don't understand intellectually, yes, maybe, but not at the heart level of what we're really going through in those situations that we experience. So I definitely would agree, and I think it's one of the great treasures of the international community that we have that understanding of each other and of the world, because we've had the local experience, but we have this experience as well, and that makes us very adaptable and resilient. Well, I'm very happy to be part of it.
Yeah, me too. And we could go on talking about this for another hour, I'm sure, but we can't. We have to stop there. So I'm going to put at the bottom of the screen your website address. So if anybody would like to find out more about the services you offer, Lyra, they can take a look there, and they will also find your contact details. So that just remains for me to say thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you very much indeed. Have a wonderful day. Take care.